Welcome to BSDN's special report, Why You Should Mock Draft in Fantasy Sports. I will be your host, Testy McTestenheim. But before we get started, let's start with some ground rules. Rule number 1, fantasy sports are for fun, friendly entertainment. Do you call out an actual professional player for not getting the points that you so desired? No! They are people and not your playthings. Do you cause physical or emotional harm to your competitors? No. They're people too. Do you have the worst team manager in the league that year paid for the food in the championship party? Yes! It's all in the spirit of competition and not to mention delicious. Rule number 2. No one cares about your fantasy team more than you. So don't be surprised when you talk to other people, especially people that don't know about fantasy sports. Anytime you talk to them, they might give you that look or cool story, bro, to get you to the next subject. Now, especially your spouse, you want to be careful about sharing fantasy information with, especially if they don't participate in fantasy. Actually, even more if they're into fantasy sports and they're in the same league with you and they beat you that week. Just stick with humility. Now that we've covered the 2 rules, let's get to the main point, why you should mock draft in fantasy sports. So if you're new to fantasy sports or you're a seasoned veteran, you've probably heard about the mock draft. Mock is to imitate someone or something closely. And in this case, the draft you will participate in to pick your players for your team. The drafting of your team is one of the most important, not to mention the most fun, parts of playing fantasy sports. So how do you have a good draft? Well, you prepare, and one of the best ways to prepare for is a mock draft, or multiple, depending on what your fancy is. Now, in this video, we will cover the 3 main components of a mock draft: the how, the what, and the when. Let's get started with the how. Now, while there are many fantasy sports and fantasy services, for this video, I will be going over mock drafting in fantasy football, and I will be using Yahoo's fantasy service, which is free. I will also be using information provided by www.fantasypros.com. It's a free service as well. Not only do they cover fantasy football, but hockey, baseball, and basketball. Feel free to check that out. But for this purposes, we'll be going over fantasy football. While there may be some similarities to the other fantasy sports, there's some things that won't. So if you're doing a different fantasy sport, make sure to go over to Fantasy Pros and check out some of their things that they have. They have articles, videos, guides, anything you name it. But this should still help you get you started on why you should mock draft in any fantasy sport. Step 1. You need to create a login and join or create a league. So if you can see, I'm going to have some visuals over here. You'll see them pop up as I'm talking. So to create a user on Yahoo, you need to click the sign in button when you go into Yahoo and make a user via Yahoo email, or you can use a Google email if you already have one. If you don't have either, you're going to have to make a new email account. Now, once you do create a login, you either have to create a league or you can join a public league. I won't go into the details of these because if you click on them, they'll give you the step-by-step instructions. However, most leagues that you will join are private and need direct invites. So once you have a user, you need to have the league commissioner, the person who's managing that fantasy league, send you an email invite or direct text invite, which will allow you to customize your team name, profile picture, most importantly, join the league. Step 2, get into a mock draft lobby. Once you have a login and accepted the invite from someone else or created your own league, you will see the following image on your screen when you log in. At the bottom right, you'll notice it'll say Mock Draft Today. It's a little blue link. You're going to click it and it will take you to the following page. It will show you a list of open draft lobbies you can join to participate in a mock draft. It's important to know how many teams will be competing in your league, as there are many options for mock drafts, such as 8, 10, 12, and 14 are the most common. Once you know how many teams your league will have, choose an open lobby by clicking a draft position number 1 through whatever the end is, and it will lead you to the following screen. For this video, I will be showing examples of a 12-team mock draft for fantasy football. Now, there's a lot of information on that screen, and the following screen I'll be covering, but I will cover that in the what section of this video. For now, Just wait for the timer on the left to hit 00 and it will show a loading bar telling you you're getting ready to join the actual mock draft. Now that you are in a mock draft, there are a few things you will need to do. A, monitor the draft order, and when you pull up the draft, it's in the window on the middle left. B, review and select players to draft. It'll be in that middle big window. And then C, review what positions you still need on your team window on the middle right. Now, when you look at the draft order window, you will see your team name and the pick number highlighted. Make sure to monitor where your pick is and when your next pick will be coming as you go through the draft. When it is your turn to draft, you will select a player by clicking on them. Then a blue button will appear on the top right of their picture. Click on that button and they will be added to your team window. Now, as the draft goes along, you will see that your team window will fill up with players. This will help you decide what players or positions you still need to draft. Once all your team positions are filled up, you are done with the mock draft. If you want to keep your results, you can change your settings to email you mock draft results, or you can screenshot it. Now we're in part 3, the what of mock drafting. So let's get down to the details. First, let's cover the information in a mock draft lobby screen, which is the one I first showed you that had a little bit of information on it. First, the draft type. There is regular and auction. Regular drafting is where you'll have a certain pick, and when you see those picks come, you'll just get to pick. Now, the most common way this is done is called the snake or serpentine, which basically, if you can see the image here, the first pick player gets the first pick, but can't pick till everyone else has picked twice till it comes back to them. So instead of getting first and then 13, it's first, 23rd, but then they get a pick right after because it's a snake, so they get 2 picks in a row. So you kind of have to weigh your options on which one works best for you. Now, auction is a little different. There's no person that gets to pick first or last or any of that. Basically, you get a certain budget, and then the best players start being available for auction, and you bid so much of your budget to get them. Basically, you fill up your team based on how much of your budget is. So it can get kind of difficult when you want certain players, but you don't have so much money left to fill your team. So that can be kind of fun too. But for our purposes, we'll be doing the regular snake or serpentine roster positions. As you notice in this image, the typical roster is a QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex spot, which means different position players. Typically, it's running back, wide receiver, tight end, like an extra spot to put a player, a kicker, and defense. Then you also have 6 positions on your bench because some players have a bye week where they don't play, and also people get injured or sick or other stuff that happens. So you need to have backup players. So you not only draft for the players you always want to play, but to have backups as well. Now, scoring. There is standard versus PPR, or points per reception. This is kind of specific to football, so there might be other scoring ways for other fantasy sports. Again, look up fantasypros.com for those information. Now, standard basically means that when a quarterback throws for so many yards, they get a point. If they throw a touchdown, they get so many points. Wide receiver catches the ball, so many points, touchdown points. If you look at Yahoo's standard, you'll be able to see. Now you can edit it in your league to make a certain amount of points. For example, the Yahoo standard is 4 points for a touchdown, but most leagues that I've been in have made it 6 to max actual points someone earns when they score a touchdown in a real NFL game. PPR, points per reception, have all the standard rules, but a little addition to get more points. Basically, if a wide receiver, tight end, running back, even a lineman sometimes, if they get a catch, they get points for that. And it can either be half a point per catch or a full point per catch. So those are the different ways it scores. So make sure before you mock draft in your real draft, you check what the scoring is, because that'll affect the way you pick certain players. Finally, the email settings. Here you would just click that you want the results to be emailed to you and put the preferred email. Now, let's review the key points in the actual mock draft screen, which came after you loaded into it. So first, queuing a player. Basically what that means is if you look on the top, there's this window here that says queued players. Sometimes you have an idea of several people that you want and you want to keep track of them so you're aware who's still available and you can order them by priority. All you have to do is there is a star next to each player in that middle area. You just have to click it, and once you click it, it will pop into the queue. And you can have as many as you want. so that you can keep track regardless of position. So that can be really useful as you're in a real draft. You have players ready to go, especially say you're doing this online. It's really important to have that queue because say you get kicked off the internet for some reason or just crazy stuff happens, you have a queue to put players that you really wanted so it doesn't auto draft players you don't even want. Player stats. If you look at each player when you click on them, it shows last year's statistics and then their projected statistics of how well they'll do this year, making fantasy points. Now, if you look at some of these stats, the first, of course, is how many fantasy points that they're projected to get. But also, when it comes to the position like quarterback, how many touchdowns are they going to throw? How many did they throw last year? How many yards total did they throw last year? How much do they think they're going to throw this year? Wide receiver, running back, how many touchdowns are they going to get? How many yards are they going to gain? It's good to look at these and study these so you can see how good someone did compared to what they might get this next year. It might change some of your thoughts on who you want to draft in the actual draft. Position type. I already talked about it, showing what positions you need to fill for specifically fantasy football. But it's good to make sure you know which each position does and what type of points they can get before you start picking the ones you want. Bye week. If you notice, each player has a bye week based on what their team bye week is, which means they have a week they don't play. That's important to know because say you draft 3 wide receivers that all have the same bye week, then you're kind of in a pickle because when you need to replace people that week, you got to give something up or switch some people. It can get really hectic. So it's really good to have multiple players all have different bye weeks when you're drafting. Next is rank versus X rank. Now, rank is based on how many point total they think they're going to get out of the whole season. So typically the higher rank is quarterbacks because they'll get the most points typically. However, X rank is useful because it's based on the average draft position or value that will be played, which we'll talk about in a minute. So it's when you look at Yahoo, X rank is the one that really helps you monitor more what's going to be happening in an actual draft. Now, ADP or average draft position. If you notice, all these individuals have a certain position when they're typically draft, which means as if we look at Jonathan Taylor, who right now is the overall consensus of always going to be the first pick, right now his average draft position is 1. Everyone's pretty much drafting him first, and if there is, it's a very small margin that people that don't. Now, when you get later down the line, there might be some people that don't get drafted until way longer, but you really want them, so you might pick them earlier. That's something you want to watch because as you draft with multiple people, you don't know what players they want and when the average draft will be, so it's good to monitor that. Now, if you really want to have an edge when preparing for your draft in your fantasy leagues, let's talk about statistics and math. I know I might have lost some of you there, and that's okay. If you really don't want to get into this, feel free to go to this timestamp to go to the when of mock drafting. You still here? All right, let's get to the really deep stuff of statistics and math that actually can really help you win a league championship. So for this purpose, we're going to be talking about strength of schedule and ECR, expert consensus ranking. For that, we're going to use the Fantasypros website and show you what that looks like. So strength of season. As you notice, it's out of 5 stars. More stars meaning a harder season, like stronger opponents to play. Weaker means they have less hard opponents, so it might be easier for them to be able to get more points. This can be really important depending on certain positions. Let's give an example of Derrick Henry. He's typically known as, regardless of the team he plays, he will stomp them and get lots of points. So when you want to draft someone like Derrick Henry, who's a running back, you don't really worry about the strength of schedule because he's shown time and time again, it doesn't matter the team, he still performs really well. But say you have a player like a wide receiver who sometimes has difficulty when they play harder defense teams, and you want to go draft them, but you notice their strength of schedule is like a 5, but then you see someone else you might like to draft, but they're a little lower on your list, but their strength of schedule is 2, you might want to pick them because they might have a better chance of getting more points. Just some little nuances, but it can be really important going down the line, especially when you're in the playoffs. Now, expert consensus ranking, or ECR. Now, some people don't usually go by the average draft position. They feel like having experts have a consensus of a ranking of where they should be, as you see here, is sometimes more important than the actual draft position. Now, if you look here, this shows the current consensus of like the top 10 who are expected to be drafted based on hundreds of experts in fantasy football. Now, of course, you don't have to follow any of their advice, but it can be useful to see what other people are wanting to draft, because then that can help you be able to know who you really want to draft later, sooner. Like I said, a lot of statistics and math. So this can be important to know as well. Now, one of the key things you see here over at the end is ECR versus ADP. And this comes with standard deviation. Now, in this highlighted image, I kind of show the detail of what ECR versus ADP means. If you see right here, it says Derrick Henry is a +4. What that means is his current rank is the number 2 pick, the number 2 player to draft. What that means is right now, his average draft position is actually 6 instead of 2. The average draft position is 4 less than the ECR. The ECR is 4 more than the average draft position, basically meaning that if you can draft Derrick Henry at pick 6, that's a really good value, and it definitely is. So this will show you which players are ranked higher, and then which players are maybe being drafted too soon based on the rankings. Again, it's all statistics and math, and your own judgment comes up to you. Finally, part 3, when to mock draft. So now that you know how and what mock drafting is about, when is the best time to mock draft? Most often mock drafts are not available until after the NFL draft, which is usually late April. For other sports, of course, that can be different because their seasons are all throughout the year. Again, check fantasy sports sites to see when that might be. Now, for fantasy football purposes, the most honest answer I can give you, and actually for all fantasy sports, is whenever you want to. However, there are a few things that may help you decide when to start mock drafting. One of those is changes in the rosters. That can come from injuries on or off the field, training camp battles, certain positions battling, say who's the better position will be named the starter, players' behaviors on and off the field, or coaches' decisions based on what they feel is best for the team. Two of the things that are important from that training camp battle part I talked about is the mandatory training camps for football teams, which is usually late July, and then the 3 preseason games, which is in mid to late August. My personal preference, however, is that from May to early July, I may draft once every 2 weeks just to see the early trends, who's being drafted, in what rounds, what positions are favorable, just to kind of get an idea, gather some data. But that's me. Once mid-July rolls around, I draft at least once a week. This helps me be able to keep up with whatever the meta is going on and kind of follow that information. Now, when the preseason games start in August, I draft at least twice a week because there's much more information you're getting from actual people playing that changes positions on the roster based on how they perform. It can be really helpful. Which brings an important side topic. Always make sure the actual draft is after the preseason is over, because I've had it happen where we draft before the preseason's over, someone gets injured, and then you're with that player and you can't do anything about it. Now, the week before the actual draft of the league I'm in, I draft once a day to get myself ready for that final battle. Get those players, baby! But in the end, it's all about what your preference is. My only hope is that this video was helpful to help you with that preference, and I wish you luck in your upcoming fantasy seasons and mock drafts and actual draft. Make sure to have fun, because that's a key part of all this stuff in this crazy world. Until next time, this is Testy McTestenheim from BSDN. Great night. Good night. Something good.